She tucked her stepdaughter into bed at night. She smiled at family dinners. She played the role of protector, the woman who stepped in when a mother walked away. But beneath that mask was a betrayal so twisted, so unforgivable, it would end in blood, rage, and a secret that poisoned everything it touched. This is the story of a woman who didn't just break trust. She infected it. She destroyed it. And when her stepdaughter discovered the truth, the confrontation that followed would leave one person dead and a community asking how something so evil could hide in plain sight for so long. This is a story about forbidden desire, deadly consequences, and a murder that no one saw coming until it was far too late. Welcome to Silent Witness, True Crime Stories. Thanks to all my viewers and subscribers for your support. Stay tuned for daily true crime updates. Don't forget to subscribe, and also download your free ebook by clicking the link in the pinned comment. How does a stepmother, a woman trusted to guide and protect, become the source of a deadly infection that changes a young woman's life forever? What drives a relationship across a line so forbidden that it shatters a family from the inside out? And when rage, betrayal, and desperation collide in one brutal night, was the murder that followed a moment of uncontrollable passion, or something far more calculated? Who really held the power in this twisted dynamic? Was the stepdaughter a victim who finally fought back, or did she become something darker in her quest for revenge? And perhaps most disturbing of all, how many warning signs were ignored before it all exploded into violence? The answers will disturb you. The truth will make you question everything you thought you knew about trust, family, and the lies people tell to protect their darkest secrets. Her name was Rebecca, and to everyone in the small town of Millbrook, Pennsylvania, she seemed like a godsend. She was 38 years old, attractive, well-spoken, and she had a warmth about her that made people feel comfortable. When she married David, a 45-year-old contractor who had been raising his daughter alone for 7 years, the community celebrated. Finally, they thought, this man who had struggled since his ex-wife abandoned them would have help. Finally, his daughter Emma would have a mother figure again. Emma was 16 when Rebecca came into her life. She was a quiet girl, artistic, spent most of her time sketching in notebooks and dreaming about attending art school in Philadelphia. She had her father's dark hair and her mother's green eyes, though she rarely spoke about the woman who left when she was 9. David was a good father, everyone agreed on that, but he worked long hours, sometimes 6 days a week, and Emma had learned to be independent. She cooked her own meals, did her own laundry, kept to herself. When Rebecca moved into their modest 2-story house on Maple Street, things seemed to improve. Rebecca made dinner every night. She asked Emma about school. She redecorated the living room, planted flowers in the front yard, and slowly, carefully, she wove herself into the fabric of their lives. But there were small moments, tiny cracks that neither David nor Emma fully understood at first. Rebecca would linger too long in Emma's doorway at night. She would brush Emma's hair back from her face in a way that felt just slightly too intimate. She would sit too close on the couch during movie nights, her hand resting on Emma's knee. Emma felt uncomfortable but didn't know how to name it. She told herself she was being paranoid. She told herself that Rebecca was just trying to bond with her, that maybe this was what having a mother felt like and she had simply forgotten. David noticed nothing. He was too relieved, too grateful to have someone who seemed to care about his daughter, who took the burden of parenting off his shoulders after so many years of carrying it alone. He worked even longer hours, trusting that his home was finally stable, that his family was finally whole. And Rebecca, for her part, played the role flawlessly in public. She attended Emma's school art shows. She volunteered at the local food bank. She smiled at neighbors and brought casseroles to church potlucks. But behind closed doors, something else was happening, something that would soon spiral into devastation. It started 6 months after Rebecca moved in. Emma was 17 now, a senior in high school, preparing for college applications and trying to navigate the strange new reality of having a stepmother. One night in late September, David was away on a job 3 hours north, a renovation project that would keep him gone for 4 days. Emma was in her room, working on a charcoal drawing, when Rebecca knocked softly and came in without waiting for an answer. She sat on the edge of Emma's bed, closer than usual, and began asking questions that felt too personal. Questions about boys at school, questions about whether Emma had ever been kissed, whether she had ever felt desired. Emma's stomach tightened. She tried to deflect, to make a joke, but Rebecca reached out and touched her face, her thumb tracing Emma's jawline, and everything shifted. Emma froze. She didn't know what to do, how to react, and in that moment of paralysis, Rebecca leaned in and kissed her. Emma pushed her away, stammered something about needing to finish her homework, and Rebecca left the room smiling as if nothing had happened. Emma didn't sleep that night. She told herself it was a mistake, a misunderstanding, something she could pretend never occurred. But it happened again, and again. Rebecca began coming into her room at night when David was asleep or away. She would sit on the bed, touch Emma's hair, whisper things that made Emma's skin crawl. And then one night, it went further. Emma was too confused, too ashamed, too afraid to tell her father. She didn't have the language for what was happening to her. She felt trapped, manipulated, like she was somehow complicit in something she never wanted. Rebecca told her it was their secret, that no one would understand, that David would be devastated if he knew. She told Emma that she loved her, that this was special, that Emma was mature enough to handle something most people couldn't. And Emma, isolated and terrified, began to believe that maybe this was her fault. Maybe she had done something to encourage it. Maybe she was the one who was wrong. The relationship, if you could even call it that, continued for 3 months. And then in early December, Emma started feeling sick. She had a persistent cough, night sweats, a fever that wouldn't break. She went to the school nurse, who sent her to a clinic, and after a blood test, the results came back. HIV positive. Emma sat in the clinic's small, sterile office, staring at the paperwork in her hands, and felt her entire world collapse. She was 17 years old. She had never been with anyone except Rebecca. And in that moment, everything became horribly, brutally clear. Rebecca had known. Rebecca had infected her. Rebecca had destroyed her future, her body, her trust. And she had done it knowingly, deliberately, without remorse. Emma didn't cry when she got home. She didn't scream. She walked into the house, found Rebecca in the kitchen chopping vegetables for dinner, and asked her a single question. "Did you know?" Rebecca turned around, saw the look on Emma's face, and for just a second her mask slipped. She didn't deny it. She didn't apologize. She just stared at Emma with something cold and calculating in her eyes and said, "You'll be fine. People live with it now." Emma felt something snap inside her. All the fear, all the shame, all the months of being manipulated and used, it all turned into something else. Rage. Pure, burning, uncontrollable rage. She didn't plan what happened next. She didn't think. She just acted. There was a knife on the counter, the one Rebecca had been using to chop carrots, and Emma grabbed it. Rebecca saw it coming and tried to back away, but Emma was faster. The first stab hit Rebecca in the shoulder, the second in the chest. Rebecca screamed, stumbled backward, knocked over a chair, and Emma kept going. She didn't stop until Rebecca was on the floor, bleeding, gasping, staring up at her with wide, disbelieving eyes. And then Emma dropped the knife, sank to her knees, and called 911. When the police arrived 10 minutes later, they found Emma sitting on the kitchen floor covered in blood, trembling, and Rebecca dead 3 feet away. The scene was horrific, brutal, and at first, investigators had no idea what had driven a 17-year-old girl to murder her stepmother in such a violent, visceral way. But when they began digging into Emma's life, into Rebecca's past, the truth started to emerge, and it was worse than anyone could have imagined. If you're still with me, drop a comment saying I'm still here. Let's see who's following this story to the end. The investigation into Rebecca's death moved quickly, But the more detectives uncovered, the more disturbing the case became. Emma was taken into custody immediately, but she wasn't arrested. She was placed in protective care while police tried to piece together what had happened. She didn't resist. She didn't try to run. She simply sat in the back of the police car, staring out the window, her hands still stained with blood. David was called home from his job site, and when he arrived at the police station and was told that his wife was dead and his daughter had killed her, he collapsed. He couldn't understand it. He kept saying there had to be a mistake, that Emma would never hurt anyone, that Rebecca had been good to them. But within 24 hours, the evidence began to tell a different story. Emma's medical records were subpoenaed, and her HIV diagnosis was confirmed. Detectives interviewed her doctor, who reported that Emma had been devastated when she received the results, that she had disclosed being in a sexual relationship with an older woman but had been too afraid to name her. When pressed by investigators, Emma finally broke down and told them everything. She described the months of grooming, the manipulation, the nights Rebecca came into her room. She described the fear, the shame, the feeling that she had somehow caused it, and she described the moment she found out she was infected, the moment she realized that Rebecca had known all along and had done it anyway. Detectives ran tests on Rebecca's body during the autopsy, and the results confirmed it. Rebecca had been HIV positive for at least 5 years. She had been on medication, managing the virus, but she had never disclosed her status to Emma. She had engaged in a sexual relationship with a minor, knowingly infected her, and manipulated her into silence. The district attorney was stunned. This wasn't just a murder case. This was abuse, exploitation, and biological assault all wrapped into one horrific package. But the investigation didn't stop there. Detectives began looking into Rebecca's past, trying to understand who she really was beneath the facade she had presented to the community. What they found was chilling. Rebecca had been married twice before. Her first husband had filed for divorce after 2 years, citing infidelity and emotional abuse. Her second husband had died under suspicious circumstances, a fall down the stairs that was ruled accidental, but had raised questions among friends and family. Rebecca had also worked as a teacher's aide in Ohio before moving to Pennsylvania, a job she left abruptly after a parent accused her of inappropriate behavior toward a teenage student. The accusation had never been formally investigated, and Rebecca had moved on before it could escalate. She had a history of targeting vulnerable people, of inserting herself into families where she could gain control, and of leaving destruction in her wake. Millbrook had welcomed her with open arms, never knowing what she really was. Neighbors were interviewed, and their testimonies painted a picture of a woman who had seemed perfect on the surface, but had kept everyone at arm's length. She didn't have close friends. She didn't share details about her past. She controlled the narrative, always, and no one had thought to question it. David was devastated. He blamed himself for not seeing the signs, for trusting Rebecca, for leaving Emma alone with her. He gave a statement to police describing how Rebecca had seemed loving and supportive, how he had never noticed anything inappropriate. But looking back, he admitted there were moments that now felt wrong. The way Rebecca would insist on being alone with Emma, the way she discouraged Emma from spending time with friends, the way she always seemed to know where Emma was, what she was doing, who she was talking to. It had seemed like concern at the time. Now it looked like control. The case went to trial 6 months later, and the courtroom was packed. The prosecution argued that while Emma had committed murder, she had done so in a moment of extreme emotional distress after being sexually abused and knowingly infected with a life-threatening virus by a trusted adult. The defense didn't dispute the facts. They simply asked the jury to consider what Emma had endured, what Rebecca had taken from her, and whether a 17-year-old girl who had been manipulated, groomed, and destroyed could be held fully responsible for her actions in that moment of rage. The prosecution presented medical records, text messages between Emma and Rebecca that showed the manipulative language Rebecca had used, and testimony from Emma herself, who took the stand and described in heartbreaking detail what her life had been like for those 3 months. The courtroom was silent. Some people cried, others looked away, and through it all, Emma sat in the witness stand, pale and hollow-eyed, and told the truth. But just when everyone thought they understood the full scope of the horror, a final piece of evidence emerged that changed everything. During the trial, the prosecution introduced a piece of evidence that had been discovered late in the investigation: Rebecca's laptop. Forensic analysts had recovered deleted files, and what they found was chilling. Rebecca had kept a journal, a digital diary where she documented her thoughts, her plans, and her relationships. And in that journal, she had written about Emma. She had written about how she had chosen Emma specifically, how she had seen the girl as naive and easy to manipulate. She had written about her own HIV status, about how she had stopped taking her medication months before she began the sexual relationship with Emma. She had written in explicit detail about her intention to infect Emma, describing it as a way to bind them together, to ensure that Emma would never be able to leave her because no one else would want her. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't negligence. It was deliberate, calculated, and sadistic. Rebecca had weaponized her own virus, using it to trap and control a teenage girl who had trusted her. The courtroom erupted when this evidence was presented. The judge had to call for order multiple times. Emma, sitting at the defense table, put her face in her hands and sobbed. David in the gallery looked like he might be sick. The defense immediately moved to introduce the journal as evidence of extreme provocation, arguing that Emma's actions, while tragic, were the direct result of discovering that she had been intentionally infected by someone she trusted. The prosecution didn't fight it. Even they seemed shaken by the revelation. The trial took another dark turn when the defense called a psychologist to the stand, an expert in trauma and abuse who testified about the psychological impact of what Emma had endured. The psychologist explained that victims of grooming often experience profound confusion, shame, and self-blame. They described how the discovery of the intentional infection would have been a catastrophic betrayal, a moment when Emma's entire understanding of reality shattered. They testified that in that moment, Emma would have been operating in a state of acute psychological distress, not thinking clearly, not able to process the enormity of what had been done to her. The psychologist didn't excuse the murder, but they provided context, a framework for understanding how a 17-year-old girl could commit such a violent act. The prosecution's cross-examination was brief. They didn't dispute the trauma. They simply asked whether trauma justified taking a life. The defense responded with a question of their own. If someone deliberately infects you with a deadly virus, if they manipulate and abuse you for months, if they take away your future, your health, your sense of safety, is fighting back truly unjustifiable? The jury was left to grapple with that question. The final days of the trial were emotionally exhausting for everyone involved. Character witnesses testified about Emma's life before Rebecca, describing her as a gentle, creative, introverted girl who had never shown any signs of violence. Teachers talked about her dedication to her art, her kindness toward classmates, her quiet determination to build a better life for herself. Friends testified about how she had changed after Rebecca moved in, how she had withdrawn, stopped returning calls, seemed anxious and afraid. The portrait that emerged was of a girl who had been systematically destroyed by an adult who should have protected her. And then the prosecution rested, and the defense rested, and the jury was sent to deliberate. The wait was agonizing. Emma sat in a holding cell, unable to eat, unable to sleep, replaying that night in the kitchen over and over in her mind. David sat in the courtroom hallway, his head in his hands, wondering how his life had come to this. The community of Millbrook watched the news, divided over whether Emma was a victim or a murderer, whether justice meant punishment or mercy. And after 3 days of deliberation, the jury came back with a verdict. The trial took another dark turn when the defense called a psychologist to the stand, an expert in trauma and abuse who testified about the psychological impact of what Emma had endured. The psychologist explained that victims of grooming often experience profound confusion, shame, and self-blame. They described how the discovery of the intentional infection would have been a catastrophic betrayal, a moment when Emma's entire understanding of reality shattered. They testified that in that moment, Emma would have been operating in a state of acute psychological distress, not thinking clearly, not able to process the enormity of what had been done to her. The psychologists didn't excuse the murder, but they provided context, a framework for understanding how a 17-year-old girl could commit such a violent act. The jury came back with a verdict. The jury found Emma guilty of voluntary manslaughter, not first-degree murder. They acknowledged that she had killed Rebecca, but they also acknowledged the extraordinary circumstances that had led to that moment. The judge sentenced her to 8 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 5. It was a sentence that satisfied no one. Some people thought it was too harsh, that Emma was a victim who had acted in self-defense, that she deserved leniency or even a suspended sentence. Others thought it was too lenient, that murder was murder, that nothing justified taking a life, no matter the circumstances. Emma herself seemed numb when the sentence was read. She didn't cry, she didn't react. She simply stood up, was handcuffed, and was led out of the courtroom. David broke down. He tried to reach her, to say something, anything, but the guards moved her too quickly, and all he could do was watch as his daughter disappeared through a side door. The case made national headlines, sparking debates about grooming, about the legal system's treatment of abuse victims, about how society fails young people who are trapped in situations they don't have the tools to escape. Advocacy groups rallied around Emma, calling her a survivor, demanding reforms to protect minors from predatory adults. Others argued that sympathy for Emma's circumstances didn't erase the fact that she had taken a life, that justice required accountability even in the most tragic cases. Emma served 4 years of her sentence before being granted parole. During that time, she participated in therapy, earned her GED, and began taking online college courses in psychology, hoping to one day help other survivors of abuse. She didn't speak publicly about her case, didn't give interviews, didn't seek attention. She simply tried to rebuild a life that had been shattered when she was 17 years old. David visited her every week during her incarceration. He never missed a visit. He brought her books, photos, letters from people who wanted her to know she wasn't alone. He apologized constantly, though Emma always told him it wasn't his fault, that he couldn't have known, that Rebecca had fooled everyone. Their relationship, once so close, had been fundamentally changed by the tragedy, but they worked to find a new normal, a way to move forward despite the weight of everything that had happened. When Emma was released, she moved to a small town in upstate New York, far from Millbrook, far from the memories. She changed her name legally, started over, and tried to build a life where her past didn't define her every moment. She still takes medication for HIV every day, a permanent reminder of what Rebecca did to her, but she manages it, lives with it, refuses to let it steal any more of her future than it already has. Rebecca was buried quietly in a cemetery outside Millbrook. Few people attended the funeral. Her family, estranged and distant, released a brief statement expressing shock and sorrow, but offered no defense of her actions. The house on Maple Street was sold. David moved into a small apartment closer to his work, unable to live in the place where so much pain had occurred. The community of Millbrook eventually moved on, as communities do, but the case left a scar, a reminder that evil doesn't always announce itself, that sometimes it wears a kind face and sits at your dinner table and destroys you from the inside out. And the question that lingered, the question that no one could fully answer, was whether this tragedy could have been prevented. If Emma had felt safe enough to tell someone earlier. If the school, the neighbors, the community had been more vigilant. If Rebecca's past had been more thoroughly examined before she was welcomed into a vulnerable family. The truth is complicated. The truth is that predators are skilled at hiding, at manipulating, at ensuring that no one sees them until it's too late. And the truth is that sometimes, by the time someone fights back, the damage is already done. So, what do you think? Was Emma a victim who had no choice but to defend herself in the only way she knew how, or did she cross a line that no amount of trauma can justify? Was the sentence fair, or should the justice system have shown more mercy to a girl who had been so thoroughly betrayed? And perhaps most importantly, how do we as a society protect young people from predators who hide in plain sight, who wear the mask of a caregiver, who use trust as a weapon? I want to know what you think. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Tell me if you think justice was served, or if this case reveals something broken in how we handle abuse and retaliation, and if this story affected you, if it made you think about trust, about family, about how quickly a life can be destroyed, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, because we're bringing you more true crime documentaries that dig deep into the darkest corners of human behavior, stories that make you question everything you thought you knew about right and wrong. Next time, we're covering a case even more disturbing than this one, a story about betrayal that spanned decades and destroyed an entire town. You won't want to miss it. Thank you for watching. Stay safe. And remember, the people we trust the most are sometimes the ones capable of the greatest harm.